where the ordinary fades and the mysterious takes over. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to uncover the stories that'll send shivers down your spine. Let the journey into the unknown begin. Did I meet a witch? Coincidence? 3 years ago, my fiancé and I went for a holiday in Montenegro. We were walking down a little street that was also a marketplace. They were selling stuff on tables. At almost every table, someone tried to lure us in to buy from them, but we weren't interested in anything. Then suddenly, we saw one really weird-looking lady selling fruits. It looked like it was out of this world. They were huge, they were perfectly ripe, and they were spotless. My partner and I agreed that we'll check it out. My guess would be that the old lady was a gypsy, wearing a black coat with red roses. Her atmosphere was weird. We bought 2 or 3 kilos of apples and grapes. As we were leaving, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I took a single peach from her table without her seeing. I basically stole it. Lame. Because I was so curious how it tasted, then buy it. Even today, I don't have an explanation why I did it. I never stole in my life. And other option would have been just kindly asking if I could try it, or even just buy one for God's sake. Yeah. Anyways, I took it. And after we left the market on our way to the hotel, I took a bite from the peach. It exploded in my mouth. It was awful and had rotten cream in it. I started coughing and I almost vomited. I looked at the peach and it was all black and brown on the inside. Its seed was missing, and it was full of maggots or some kind of larva. It was very strange because I could have sworn I didn't see any holes on it, and like I said, it was spotless. After we got home, as we're getting ready to go out to the city, started feeling nauseous. In a short period, I started vomiting and having diarrhea with a fever. It was weird because I didn't swallow any of the fruit, and funny enough, when my fiancé opened the other fruit that we actually bought, all of them were picture perfect in the inside and delicious. It took me 3 days to recover. Now, we could speculate that maybe I'm just, contracted some disease from elsewhere, who knows. It was just a really big coincidence. The face of that lady burned in my memory, and her atmosphere. She was kind, but also scary. Could it be that she's some kind of a witch? Why did I felt the huge urge to steal from her? I'm not that person. Oh, you're never that person until you are that person. I think that's kind of a happy ending. And by the way, if you put salmonella or any contagious bacteria or virus in your mouth, that's generally all it takes. An opening is an opening. Paranormal sightings from my work's back warehouse. Human-sounding noises, knocks, footfalls, scuffs. For context, I work at Alco Clothing Outlet. I feel comfortable dropping the company name now on account of the location I work at filing for bankruptcy. And the vast majority of the location is hosted by an extensive back warehouse taking up about 70% of the entire building. I work as a cleaner part-time, so it's rare I have to go back there for very long. But the majority of the stories I have, they stem from said back warehouse. Most importantly, this story's not mine. The store's cashier's, an older woman. Told it to my manager, who told it to me the same day she heard about it. Anyways, as for the story, and why I bring this up, while she was on the main floor, my coworker, the cashier, she claims that she's heard sporadic and heavy footsteps on the roof of the building. Easily some dozen feet above us and made of metal and concrete. As far as I'm aware, nothing like this has ever happened before. Not to this extent. Especially since there's no maintenance scheduled for that day. And if there was, the roof would have nothing to do with it, much less the section over the main floor. The main reason I'm inclined to even bring this up, or to believe in, is because of another one of my personal experiences. My shift was cut an hour short one day. That's because the manager on duty needed someone to be cut from the schedule due to it being so slow that particular day. But in order to stave off boredom, since I don't know how to drive and my ride wouldn't be able to get me to another hour or so, I just decided to wander to the back warehouse. I went there to call one of my buddies on the phone. Since the lights were off and I was certain the last of the main back warehouse workers had gone home for the day as well, because who the hell works in the dark? So as I got nearer the janitor's closet to put the last of my supplies away for the day, I heard what was undeniably, to me at least, it sounded like the scuff of a sneaker on a tile floor. It was hardly 3 feet beside me. It gave me enough pause to swivel my head around and skedaddle back to the safety of the main floor's break room. Mind you, this scuff was maybe 15-20 feet away from the spot where I saw a shadow figure weeks prior. Finally, since I feel it's partially relevant here and probably doesn't warrant its own conversation, many of my coworkers once again claim to regularly hear knocking from the main wall separating the lit floor and the dark warehouse. The only wall without any kind of window, gate, or door. Though that one could easily be explained away in my mind. Does anyone think this could at all be related to the quote-unquote tall figure that ducked out of view that I'd mentioned in a prior confession? Or if it's even paranormal at all? I'd love a second opinion from anybody who doesn't work at that building. Does anyone think this could at all be related? The ghost car. I would say about a year or 2 years ago, maybe. I was out with my husband and 2 of her friends. We went out to the movies and we went to dinner. Everything was going great. We were heading back to our friend's house so we could pick up our car and go home. We were all chatting away in the car. This had to be about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I live in West Virginia, and our friends lived in a very rural part of West Virginia. I mean, after 6 o'clock, there's no one on the roads. We're all just chatting while it's pitch black outside. We could see maybe 100 feet in front of us, and there was a dark vehicle. Couldn't possibly make out the color, considering it was, me being in the backseat with my husband. We didn't think anything of the vehicle per se. It was just kind of uncommon to see someone else out on the road that late. So, we continued on our conversation for another 5 minutes. All I could really remember about the vehicle was seeing its red taillights. All of a sudden, the car turned right. No turn signal, just sort of an immediate right turn. When we get up to where the car turned off the road, I noticed there was no road there. No driveway of any sorts. Also, the car wasn't there either. It was just a bunch of trees and nothing else. The car filled with silence, and I kind of just shook my head at it. I mean, I've experienced a friends and my husband spoke up, changed my mind forever. They all three asked at the same time, "Did you see that? Did you see that car disappear?" We all saw the exact same car drive off without a trace. I'm not sure what I saw that night. It gives me chills just writing this out. I will say, when I thought people were following me, and if you have a manual car, you can absolutely turn off all the lights. So he could have hooked a right, thought you were the scary people, and turned off his lights. I only say that because I used to do that. Little girl who's followed me since I was 13. I believe my first experience with her started when I was 13. I was staying the weekend at my Mimi's, which is my grandmother's house. She could always talk to me about this spirit that she feels like was in her house. She told me that she'd hear footsteps, knocks, whispers, and small touches. I was sleeping on the couch, and I distinctly remember, waking up to a loud thump. It was coming from the kitchen, which was diagonal from where I was laying, meaning that I could see directly into the kitchen. I saw absolutely nothing because I thought, well, maybe Mimi went in for a late-night snack or a drink. I thought nothing of it, even though I didn't see her in the kitchen. I closed my eyes and I tried to fall back to sleep. I was woke up by yet another loud thump coming from the kitchen. This time I lifted myself onto my elbows. I stared into the kitchen. The entire house was dark except for the overhead light on our stove vent. It was enough light to see the entire kitchen, and yet I saw no one and I couldn't figure out the source of the noise. Right as I was about to lay down and put headphones in, I saw a small, probably around 4 foot tall shadow. It darted from the kitchen and ran down the hallway toward the bathroom. I remember being shocked because I couldn't process what I'd seen. It was a full body apparition, and it was solid black. It wasn't transparent at all, and I never saw her again that night. The next time I experienced her was a few years later when I was maybe 19. Staying the night at my parents', and the next morning I got up to brush my teeth. My parents live in a double wide, so my siblings' bedroom and the bathroom are all connected by a small, quote-unquote, hallway. I put hallway in quotation marks because it's just a tiny square of a hallway, not a massively long hallway. All the doors are shut, and my 2 sisters were in the room across from the bathroom, and my brother's bedroom was behind the bathroom. My mom and dad were watching TV in the living room at the time. I lean over and I start brushing my teeth. I hear, clear as day, "Maddie." I assumed it was one of my sisters to my right. I didn't see them in my peripheral, but I didn't think anything of it. So I annoyingly went, "What?" And it was a real B word to my siblings when I was a teenager, so I was normally annoyed when they were bothering me. When I didn't hear them respond, I looked up and no one was there. I poked my head out and looked at my parents in the living room and I asked, "Did you call my name?" They looked at me all confused and said, no. So then I opened my sister's room. They were playing a board game and they said that they didn't call my name. I asked my brother and he said the same thing. That was the first time that I heard her. Next experience was maybe that same year, but it was a different time I was over there. My mom, my one sister, and I were on the couch watching something on HGTV. Most likely House Hunters. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, and to my right was the kitchen. To my left was the rest of the living room. I don't remember what joke I had said about the show, but clear as day we all heard this little girl giggle in my right ear. We all turned and looked at each other and asked if we all heard the same thing. with it when there was multiple people, just so I didn't absent-mindedly move it myself. Well, I would ask a question only I would know in my head. I would look down so I couldn't see the board. My sisters would then tell me what it spelled out, and it was right every single time. I asked who they were, and they said their name was Anna, and that they were 12 years old, and they had a little brother named Jonas, who was 8. We always asked if we could talk to Jonas, and she would always say, no, he's too shy. I then would ask her, have you been the one following me all these years? And she would say yes. She would say that she was my spirit guide, and that she had died on my parents' property. There was a house on the other side of my parents' property a long time ago, a tall, 2-story white colonial house. It burned down in maybe 1950, I think, from what my dad said. I think they did research, and the family all died inside the house. I remember asking Anna if she was buried on the property. She said that she was in the cemetery behind my parents' house up on the hill. We climbed up there, and there are children's gravestones, but none that said Anna or Jonas. I then remember asking her where her grave is, and she would say it was never marked with the headstone. That same year, me and my fiancé were alone in the house. Hadn't messed with the board anymore. We always laid back to back, or as we say, butt to butt. Well, we said our goodnights and were going to sleep. I remember feeling fingertips tapping all the way up my spine. I just assumed it was my fiancé, so I didn't bother waking him. Only then did he say, "Did you just touch my back?" I instantly woke up, eyes wide, and turned toward him. I said, "No, did you touch me?" Because I felt fingertips up my back. My fiancé was a very big skeptic, probably because he'd never experienced anything before, and he was freaked out. It's been about 4 years since then, and he still talks about how much it creeped him out. I haven't felt, heard, or seen this little girl Anna since 2016, 2017, after that instance with my fiancé. I kind of miss her in a weird way. The Black Tag. The morning of September 11th, 2001 started like any other. By 8:46 a.m., everything had changed. The moment American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower, I knew my experience as a medical specialist wouldn't prepare me for what lay ahead. I was dispatched almost immediately, along with countless other first responders, to the World Trade Center. My role was grim but necessary, triaging the injured and tagging the dead. Carried my tags, green for minor injuries, yellow for moderate, red for critical, and black for the deceased. The scene was chaos. Bodies were strewn across the plaza, many fallen or jumped from the burning towers. My job was to identify the dead, not to dwell on how they got there. I had finished tagging bodies in the stairwell, and I turned to face the plaza. That's when I saw it, the carnage below. Debris from the collision rained down, pieces of building, chunks of airplane, and people. At first, I couldn't process what it was that I was seeing. Then I ran toward the devastation, my tags ready. One man was convulsing. A seizure was overtaking him. He was beyond saving. Others nearby were unmistakably gone, mangled, and lifeless. I moved swiftly, trying to not let the horror paralyze me. But then, I saw her. She stood out, even amidst the chaos. An older woman, maybe in her early 50s. Her hair was done neatly. She was a brunette and it was styled. She wore tasteful earrings and light makeup. Even in this hellscape, she exuded laugh that resembled a human being. Somehow, though, she was alive and lucid. She looked me directly in the eyes. I pulled out a black tag, a mark for the dead. "I'm not dead," she said. Her voice was pretty firm. "Call my daughter, I'm not dead." For a moment I froze. My mind raced trying to comprehend how she could still be alive, much less be speaking to me. "Ma'am," I managed. "Don't worry about the tag. We'll be back to help you soon." It was a lie. I knew it, and deep down I think she did too. There was nothing anyone could do for her. As I moved on to tag the others, I couldn't shake her voice. When I passed her again later, she was still there, still alive, still arguing with me. "I'm not dead," she said. It was louder this time. "I'm not dead." I told her again, help is coming. Though I knew it wasn't true, her cries followed me. I made my way back to the lobby, and the cries were echoing in my ears. For hours I worked in what I can only describe as a biblical nightmare. It was the valley of the shadow of death. Death was everywhere. It was all-consuming. I saw it, I smelled it, I heard it. And that woman with her broken body and unbroken spirit, I talked to it. It's been years. I still don't know how to process what I saw that day. Sometimes I think it wasn't real, that maybe the stress and horror played tricks on my mind. Other times I'm certain it happened exactly as I remember it. Was she truly alive, or was it some final reflex of her body pushed beyond its limits? I don't know. But I hear her voice sometimes. "I'm not dead." It stays with me, even now. I did what I could that day, though it will never feel like enough. Those of us who were there carry those memories forever. I can only hope that wherever she is, whether she survived or not, she found peace. And I hope someday I will too. There may be a portal in my house. About a week ago, I'm sitting in my kitchen browsing the web, probably Reddit, on my phone. My kids had been asleep for maybe about an hour, and my wife was in her room finishing up a paper for work. There was not a radio, there was not a television on. While browsing in complete silence, I heard my wife cough several times. The cough sounded as if she had breathed in some water and was trying to get the water out. Jokingly, I jumped out of my chair and ran over to the room where she was sitting. I started patting her back and pulling her earlobes down. Again, in a sort of joking manner. She looked at me like, WTF? So I told her I was trying to help since she coughed so hard. My wife, still with a WTF face, looked at me and said that she hadn't coughed. I stood there and I evaluated what I may have heard possibly. I thought maybe it was one of my kids, but the cough was from a woman. It wasn't a 4-year-old or 1-year-old girl's cough. Other things about this cough is that it came from inside the house. It was the type of hack, like after water goes down the wrong pipe. It was one session of coughs, about 4 coughs altogether. How did the coughing not continue if the coughs were that hard at the beginning? It didn't and still does not make sense. And that's not the only thing that happened. Fast forward to the next morning. My kids are awake and eating in the kitchen. I'm in the living room watching TV, still waking and drinking coffee. My wife is in her room getting ready for the day. All electronics are off, except the TV and the phones. My wife's phone rings from what sounds like the kitchen area. My wife runs to the kitchen to answer it because she was expecting an important phone call from work. My wife searches for her phone in the kitchen, but doesn't find it. She asks if it was my phone that rang, but I told her no. My phone was in my pocket. It turns out both my wife's work phone and personal phone are in a room on the other side of the house. We checked the kitchen and the surrounding rooms for anything that could have made the ring noise, but we found nothing. I don't know the name of the ringtone, but it is a very common ringtone for iPhones. So my wife and I searched for the reasoning as to why we could clearly hear a phone ringing in the kitchen, but obviously cannot find a logical explanation. I was gonna write it off as another weird coincidence, but I kept thinking of how clear the phone ringing was, and how my wife heard it too. I mean, add this to the cough I heard the night before, and I start to worry that there may be an intruder in my attic. I think, not possible. But I have 2 little girls and a little boy too. It's a slim chance, but I'd feel better if I just go up there and check. I text my wife to watch the kids because I'm worried there might be an intruder in the attic. I don't want to verbalize it because if they're up there, then they'll hear me. I check outside and around the house first for any signs of a person being on the roof of my house. I look for cuts in the wall and I see no signs of intrusion. I then grab the ladder to get inside the attic. The only way into this attic is through a small 2x4 foot opening at the top of the interior of a closet in one of the rooms. So I grab my flashlight and my gun. I set up the ladder and I plan on entering the attic as quick and as tactful as possible. I don't want the intruder to be lying in wait for me. I push the drywall that blocks the opening, and I can hear a door swing and then shut. And I say swing because it sounded like a door was on a hinge or hinges. Can't get the drywall off, and the element of surprise is now gone. I push through anyway, and I inspect the attic. The attic has no floorboard. You have to navigate through it by standing on support beams. It extremely is annoying to have to go up there and do housework. Yet, I find no signs of somebody being up there. No entry points, no cuts in the wall. So I come down, I double check that my wife and kids had stayed in the living room like I'd asked in case there was an intruder. She confirms that they were and no door had been shut. I pretty much already knew the door shutting wasn't them because the sound came from the attic. But there's no door in the attic. I went through a checklist of logical explanations to the cough, the phone ring, and the door shutting. I've not encountered an explanation. I know it sounds kind of weird, but frickin' portal is what I'm coming up with. I've lived in this house for years. I've always heard weird noises, but never something like this. Most portal stories I've heard sound totally far-fetched. Usually a portal story includes a demon or something spiritual. This was just totally random. People crossing dimensions to hang out in my attic. There's no malice, no sightings, and no physical evidence. But the sounds were definitely heard and are unexplainable. I intended on posting the story a few days ago, but I failed to do so. Partly because I'm always chasing after my kids and because I'm expecting a reasonable explanation to present itself. Well, that hasn't happened. Something else happened a few nights ago. It's about 11 p.m. I'm asleep in bed, and I'm woken up to my wife shaking me. She tells me she heard a door shut. I say to her that maybe her 4-year-old, but she says she's watching the monitor and the cameras are on the kids. She said that she had been watching the monitor because she had been hearing these weird noises. I say maybe it's just the house creaking. She says that she heard the window shake. Now, this is significant to me because we have some old windows. The difference between the old and new windows is that the old windows will rattle when a door is shut due to air pressure or when the house is shaking like earthquakes. New windows won't do that. So she heard a door close and the window shake. That's enough for me to grab my gun and check for an intruder. I do an interior and exterior strange things happening in a factory that I used to work at. I've been working at this place for about 2 years. It's an old chemical factory that was built in the early 1900s before World War I. I don't know much more about its history, though. For the first few months, all went pretty smoothly. But after a while, I started noticing some things that were quite odd. The first thing that I noticed, well, on my nightly rounds, there were some buildings that the lights seemed to turn on and off on their own. But I wrote that off to the old electrical installations, which could act quirky sometimes. Or employees forgetting to turn off the light after leaving the building. The thing is, that stuff kept happening, even when there was no one else but me on the premises. I could check a building on the start of my round, only to return 30 minutes later and find every light in that building turned on. But the door would still be locked. There was one particular building that constantly gave me the creeps. A flat one-story building that was basically one long hallway with office rooms on either side. Every time I walked through that hallway to check if all the offices are locked, I felt watched, like somebody was behind me looking over my shoulder. It was also in this building that I heard whispers or sighs from one of the offices, but they were always empty, and all electronic equipment that could have caused any noises, like radios or laptops, etc., were all turned off. Another building that I had weird stuff happening in, it was the metal workshop. The weirdest thing was that one night I heard a noise from within, and when I entered, all the machines, like the drills, the saws, and all of it, they were all on and running. I just ran in, hit the main emergency switch, and got the fuck out of there. That night, no one but me was on the premises. Tried to talk with some of my colleagues about it, but they said if I wanted to keep my job, I'd better stop talking about those things. Apparently, management didn't take too kindly on people asking too many questions about these things. Ghost in the kitchen. Not so long ago, I had an experience like no other. Though to this day, I'm happy to admit, I'm grateful. And when I reflect on this day, I walk with pride, as I feel I was lucky to have felt a sense of calm, and I took on a new sense of understanding. An understanding about myself and the world around me. That being said, I would like to add a bit of background. I suppose 2 bits. My life was in shambles, so I gave my dad a call. A call to turn my life around with his help. I was jobless, depressed, thin, and weak. And in a nutshell, I was a piece of you-know-whatski. My dad states that I can come home as a means to get back on track, and naturally what Dad says goes. So I was lucky to be back. I was lucky to have been on a comfy couch in a warm house with food and back in touch with our beloved pets. All this sinks in as the night grew later. Dad and his woman go to bed, and in their room with the door closed. I'm left in the living room with the dogs on their kennel. The night was easy. The TV was off. The sounds of being back home were, well, unrecognizable. I was content. I sat in the recliner and couch, and I intended on drifting off to sleep eventually. For I knew I was safe, and just overall grateful. The only lights on were the kitchen ceiling fan, which was directly above the kitchen table. And this is relevant because as I tried to drift off to sleep, I couldn't help but be a little bit annoyed that they were on, but hey, it's my dad's house. He wanted them on, I guess. So this slight annoyance kept me up until I would shift thoughts. Aha, That being said, occasionally I would look at the dog kennel and reflect on the dogs and how I miss them. Our family had 3 black lab miniature pinscher mixed dogs. We named them Ginger, Clover, and Sage. The Spice Girls, as my dad would joke. Aha. They each had their own personalities and were unique in their own way, despite looking absolutely the same. Well, anyways. During my zone-out stage, something unusual happened. What caught my attention at first was a low growl sourcing from Clover. That's her smallest Spice Girl. Aha. I paid no attention to that at first, assuming that they were just growling at each other because someone's leg touched their ear or something stupid. Aha. Mind you, all 3 fit in that kennel, but at that time, they were a bit smaller. So again, I heard a growl. I didn't mind it. Moments later, an even lower growl with a bit of a ruff in there. Aha. I guess that's this guy's way of laughing. Aha. This is when I reacted and said, "Swoosh." But what didn't occur to me at the first growl was how unusual it was that neither of them even growled. And in all my years, they never did that, especially when all was calm in the night and everything was kosher. So the second growl grabbed my attention, mainly because I didn't want my dad to wake up. So as I reached to her second growl, I let it slide for about another minute. By this time, I was in my head with the question, for what? Why is she growling? I eventually turned my head to look at her in case she did it again, only to catch her fixed on something in the kitchen. Normally, either of them would look back at you, sort of as a response to looking at them. Aha. But on this night, she was locked. So naturally, I found this odd, and so I decided to look in the direction that she was looking. And this is the part that gives me chills. I kid you not. There I saw cloud-like material above the kitchen table below the ceiling fan. And the ceiling fan was on. It was moving in its rotation. To this day, I don't understand why I was okay with this. I wasn't scared. I was anything but. I do remember feeling at ease, though. Maybe I forgot to mention that my mother had passed away in this house. And in a weird way, I was inclined many years ago to be open-minded to anything paranormal, especially if it occurred here. And I think that's key. Okay, now back to the dog. The growling persisted, and she just sat up with her front legs propped. She was the only pup aware, as the other 2 paid no mind. That in itself was weird to me as well. For when one reacts, they usually all do as a unit. So as I stay fixed on this quote-unquote cloud, I noticed that it was stationary and somewhat transparent, much like a cloud at first glance. The longer I stared, which was literally all I could do, the more I began to wonder what in the F this was. I didn't freak out, I didn't get up, I knocked on my dad's door. No, I honestly remember just falling asleep shortly after that experience, and then nothing after that. And for the record, it still gives me chills. And yes, I told my dad and my now mother, though I expected. My dad jokingly said I was crazy, and my mom assured me that she thought it could be my biological mom making her presence known. She's cool like that. Deep down, I feel that too. I also feel like my dad has accepted and probably experienced some things too prior to me. At least me showing up in the house. So all in all, I've had plenty of experiences with the paranormal before. And, well, after my mom's passing. It's just difficult to find others who can relate. Messages from animal spirits. These incidents happened many years ago, find them interesting. Back in the 80s, I used to really be into Native American studies, taking classes, going to powwows, using sage to smudge and pray, and so forth. Around spring, probably 85 or so, I went on a hiking trail near the Bay Area. It was off of Prospect Road near Stelling and Cupertino in California. Correction, the trail was actually in Saratoga. Don't recall for sure. I remember while hiking on the trail getting a strange, uneasy feeling that was kind of a bad energy. So, the next time I went there, I hiked for a bit on the trail. I went up a hill just a bit, sat down facing east. I smudged myself and, rather stupidly, prayed for the bad energies and spirits or whatever it was to leave and be replaced by positive energy. Which probably was not a wise move. Probably not even 10 seconds elapsed before I heard an animal, like something with 4 legs running up from behind. The hairs on the back of my neck and arms stood up. I was too stubborn to get up or even to try to look back. It ran to my left side, very lightly hit my left shoulder. Went a few more feet and then vanished. I couldn't see anything with my eyes, but I could feel it, and I could hear it running through the leaves. Needless to say, but saying it anyway, I made sure my sage was completely out, gathered everything together, and left. I guess I got the message that this wasn't my business to do this. Another time was in late 1989. Went to a sweat lodge, and the medicine woman was flapping an eagle wing while saying her prayers in Lakota. It actually sounded like there was an eagle inside the lodge. I was praying for the eagle to hit the top of my head because I needed help mentally. I'll take one too. I won't go into details, but I really pleaded for help. And when it didn't happen in the lodge, so... However, later that night, after getting home, taking a shower, and lying in bed, a spirit bird materialized at my closed bedroom door, flew across my room and hit me in my chest and vanished. And I say spirit bird because although I couldn't see it, similar to the 4-legged animal, I could hear its wings flapping. I could also feel its energy. I told a friend of mine what happened, and he said, maybe your heart needs healing more than your head. That's good advice. After thinking about this, I think this was, and unfortunately still is, correct. I had a lot of anger over the years for various things I'm not sure I really want to talk about. Some of it is just for forgiving myself for being immature. I don't think the spirit bird healed me, but was rather giving me a message. Funny, as a boomer, I know I still have a ton of work to do on myself. I hope to attend the Stanford powwow this summer. Be kind to each other, and to yourselves also. I'm just gonna back up that last statement. Sleep paralysis demon licked me in the ear. I live in Georgia now. I moved out here 4 years ago from Texas. I've had sleep paralysis on and off my whole life, since I was a kid. Never actually seeing any figures, but just knowing that it's there. So I took a trip with some friends to a man's retreat on the side of this mountain in North Carolina. That was when I first got here. It was hard adjusting moving across the country. It was my first time I've ever done something like that. So, that being said, I was under quite a bit of stress emotionally, trying to get my footing in a new environment. The first night we were there, I walked into my cabin with a bunch of different guys I'd never met. There was no air conditioning, and it was the dead of summer, so we're all just sweating our balls off. Everyone's laying down, and I'm on the top bunk. One of my close friends is beneath me, dead asleep. I thought you said you didn't know anyone. I fall asleep to the sound of box fan on the ground. Come 3 a.m., I wake up but I can't move. The box fan's making this warped whooshing sound. I knew what it was. I was paralyzed. My eyes are open, the room is dark, and out of the peripheral of my eye, I see someone standing there. They're looking directly at me. An extremely dark figure. He's speaking in some foreign language at me. I never felt more terrified, and for some reason, I could see his tongue coming out of his pitch black face. I don't know how to say this or how to describe how it felt, but I could literally feel this long, demonic language-speaking tongue. I feel it go into my ear, as if to terrorize me by saying it could do whatever it wanted with me. Because I have dealt with sleep paralysis the entirety of my life, essentially, I've learned a few things to combat it when I feel it onset. 1, don't fight it. 2, internally say the name Jesus. That's because, as we all know, you can't speak when you're under the spell of paralysis. 3, wait. I'm not on here trying to evangelize anyone. This shit was scary, but for some reason the name of Jesus always loosens the grip of the paralysis, even if you can't audibly speak his name. Anyways, the best advice I can give to anyone is if you feel it coming on while you're asleep, do not fight it. Only makes it stronger. Mini Grim Reaper owl gremlin watching me sleep as a child. When I was a kid, I had an experience that as I got older, I attributed to sleep paralysis or something. But the experience lasted for what felt like hours. At least, well, more than a few minutes. And in my life, 0 of my many sleep paralysis episodes have included any visual phenomenon. I was scared and I went to my parents' room to ask to sleep in their bed. Also seems to rule out sleep paralysis since I've been walking around. I laid in the middle of them. They had a big wooden beam that crossed over above the bed between a very huge V ceiling. Anyways, sitting on the beam was a small creature. At the time, I called it a gremlin. It was because I didn't know another word for something that size that stood up on 2 legs. Now, I would describe it as perhaps the size and maybe the shape of an owl, literally. It was wearing what I can only describe as a Grim Reaper cloak and hood. Nothing about this thing was visible except the cloak and hood, like I could, see no face and couldn't see any body parts. But I could see that it was standing up completely still with the hood up and the cloak thing grazing the beam. The face area under the hood was just pitch black. It stood on the beam directly above me, staring at me, and it felt this way, at least, and, couldn't see its face or eyes. So, while I sat stiff, frozen, afraid to move for so long that my muscles cramped, eventually I gained the courage to pull the blanket over my head and lay awake for hours. When I did finally sleep and wake up, nothing was there in the morning. I checked everything in the room to see if there was something that could have looked like it, being on that beam, but across the room, maybe something, but absolutely nothing was present to explain this. Was this somehow sleep paralysis, or are there owl gremlin mini creatures and grim reapers watching children sleep or something? Never heard of any similar encounters or descriptions. I will tell you that I, too, have not heard of such a thing. How about you guys? I think my grandfather comforted me from the beyond. However, in 2023, I experienced something I just could not explain. I had meant to post about it, but life kept getting in the way. So, for context, my grandfather grandfather on my dad's side died some 21 years ago. That's when I was 3. My grandparents lived in a bottom floor flat, with my uncle, their youngest son, living in the upstairs flat above them. My granddad died in the master bedroom. In the present, my grand lives in a nursing home due to dementia, but my uncle still lives upstairs. On this day, my dad brought me to the flat to collect my grand's jewelry. My gran has left her jewelry to me in her will. My dad suggested I just collect it now since my gran would not have wanted it to sit idle, or any toys that I still wanted from Gran's spare bedroom. He and his brother were going to visit my gran, so both flats were empty, except for me. To give an idea of the layout, I entered the front door into a small entryway. To the left is the master bedroom, and straight across on the right is the spare bedroom. Further forwards is the living room, the kitchen, and so on. I turned right into the spare bedroom, that's because I was attempting to find a vintage 1987 Happy Meal toy of a quarter pounder. Turns into a sort of robot. I searched for a bit and became distracted with all my old toys, one of which is a music box. There's 2 small dogs in a basket, which was on Gran's bookshelf. I decided to wind it up for old time's sake, which was a big mistake. I've always found the melody to be a bit sad. At this point, with me being alone in the sad music box, I felt kind of overwhelmed. It felt like I was stealing from my grandmother. My gran is not dead and doesn't remember me anymore, but I felt like it was wrong of me to be rummaging through her things, especially since she wasn't there and, well, taking things. I wish things could go back to the way they were. It kind of just really hit me that all I had was memories now. I was surrounded by them. I started to bawl and tried to search some more, but it was hard with tears clouding my vision. The music box finished, I picked it back up and placed it back on the shelf I'd taken it from. So any last wind stuck would have been rattled out by my movement. Searched a bit more, but quickly gave up. Never found the Happy Meal toy. I decided to stumble my way across the master bedroom. The whole back wall was kind of like a large mirrored wardrobe. I stood in front of it for a bit to try and pull myself together. It was unsuccessful, so I went around Gran's bed to her dresser to collect her jewelry. I was still bawling my eyes out, so I wasn't really doing a very good job of looking. That was until I was shocked into silence. I remembered this like it was yesterday. That's because I remembered thinking how it just wasn't right. And I also want to reiterate that a decent amount of the time has passed since the music box stopped. There was no leftover wind. I know there wasn't. I turned my head to listen properly and stopped crying. I heard the music box playing again, and I remember I slowly went around my grand's bed back to the door because I was sure that it would stop. Or maybe I was just imagining things. However, when I got to the door of the spare bedroom across the hall, I stared at the music box and confirmed it was playing and continued to do so. I looked around the room, bewildered, and called out, "Granddad, is that you?" The music box immediately fell silent. I remember being completely amazed and crying even harder as I wished my granddad was there physically. I suppose he was, in a way. I quickly phoned my boyfriend and my mom about what had happened, and they both expressed that it was very odd. When my uncle and dad came back, I quickly told them as well. My dad doesn't believe in ghosts whatsoever, but even he agreed that my story was very strange. My uncle also commented that if anybody was to stick around, it would probably be my granddad. It's also worth noting that my mom has had an experience with seeing my granddad after his death as well. He appeared to her the night before he was diagnosed with pneumonia and told her things would get bad, but everything would be fine eventually. This and my experience made me think my granddad's trying to look out for me from the beyond. My dog saw it first. Then I wish I hadn't looked. The other night, I routinely took my dog out before bed, as one does. As soon as I stepped outside, Robert, my dog, weird name, I'm aware, he started acting off. He wouldn't leave my side when normally he takes off running into the backyard. Once we reached his usual spot, he refused to go, despite my constant prompting. It was freezing out, and I did not want to be out there for longer than I had to be. But he kept looking around. All of a sudden, this sort of freaked me out the most. He stopped frantically. He was searching the garden, and his eyes locked in onto one spot. I've never personally experienced anything paranormal, but I am aware of the theories surrounding how animals have a sort of special sense for these kinds of things. Robert began to growl underneath his breath, and then he bore his teeth, which is completely out of character for the sweetest staffy dog I've ever met. I tried to pick him up, but he turned to me and almost bit me, which completely threw me because he's never shown any aggression towards people at all. That's when I decided to figure out what the hell he was looking at. And I just couldn't see anything. Like genuinely nothing, just darkness. And that's when a rustle like wind blowing a pile of leaves made Robbie freak out. It was a completely still night. Absolutely no wind or breeze. That was when I grabbed Robbie and ran inside. Has anybody had an experience with animals like this? He's been acting strange ever since, and it's freaking me out. As we speak, my dog stares at the corner. Stares up into the corner, and just keeps on doing that. So, yeah, a little bit. Although he will only yell at me and not attack me. He yells a lot. Visits around the same time, same day. Just to hop right to my question. Anybody notice being visited around the same time of day? On a perhaps semi-weekly occurrence? For example, when you get a visit, it's always on a Friday morning. So, several months ago, I think about 5 or 6, I'm working in my basement, which I had only somewhat recently started to do. It was a Friday morning, and I think somewhere between 10 a.m. and noon. I heard 3 or 4 taps somewhere. Couldn't tell if it was on a wall, the ceiling, or from the floor above me. I also considered if it was outside as I sit near a window, though it sounded like it was inside the house. The following week, Friday morning, similar time frame, I heard 4 very distinct taps. They were louder, and they seemed to have more intent behind them, and I'm 99% sure they were on the wall about 8 feet away, which is roughly where I thought it was coming from before. Also, I was home alone both these times. I can't recall if it happened the following week, but I do know it stopped for a bit around there. About 1, maybe 2 months later, so about 3.5 months ago, I heard it again, but it seemed a little bit more faint. It was around the same time on a Friday again. With it being a little more faint, I was wondering if I just imagined it. This morning, on Friday, I was on a call around 11:15, and a music box that we recently put into our basement sometime in the last week or so started to play. The box plays a singular note. It's pretty common if you just touch it. It's very finicky. But it hasn't made a beat by itself before. It was just doing one note at a time. But it played maybe 6 or 8 notes overall. I made a joke to my coworker that a ghost is going to kill me. Then I just hung up. End of conversation anyways. After hanging up, I realized it was a Friday morning again. Then realized it was probably another visit. And not just a weird shift in temperature or something else that could have caused it. Yeah, again, I'm just curious if anybody else has noticed visits around a similar time like this. And also, what can be done? We've been here almost 12 years now. Never noticed anything until a few months ago. My wife did burn white sage in the basement several years ago. That was because she had like a eerie feeling, you could say, down there. But that's mostly because one of her cats would always scream at us when we were down there. She, being the cat, did seem mostly to stop screaming at us shortly after burning the sage. Also, after the event this morning, it did say aloud that if anybody else was around me, that they should know that they're a ghost, and they passed away, and that it's okay to go to the other side. I don't know if that would help, but I didn't know what else to do. Do things follow us? Over the years, I've started to wonder if something might have a tendency to follow myself or my family, and mess things about a bit for us. If there's something to this mindset, I'd say it's on my mom's side, as opposed to being on my dad's. But only really seems to affect the girls in the family, my mom included. So I'll try to keep this brief, while providing as much detail as possible. A bit of an oxymoron, but hey. So the origins of this would be with my mom. Her childhood wasn't the greatest. Broken family, and she entered into the world as a desperate attempt by her folks to save their marriage. Me too. Her mom walked out of the family home when my mom was just over 13. After spending years in a fairly explosive and physically emotionally abusive marriage. As a result, my mom's childhood was spent serving as a surrogate lady of the house figure. She cooked, she cleaned, she managed the house while her dad internalized and distanced himself from any parental responsibilities, aside from providing an income. Suffice it to say, her childhood home wasn't the happiest of places. Anytime she discusses anything to do with the paranormal, my mom refers to this house as the start-off point. She remembers waking up at night from nightmares, demanding things get out in a demonic voice that she could never replicate. She can recall being thrown across her bedroom by an unseen force. Another instance is her being pushed down the staircase from the top step, crashing down on the tiled hallway below. No broken bones, miraculously, but certainly not the greatest of experiences to have as a kid. Stop licking yourself. Her brother, who was sent on to boarding school, would spend the summer at home. In one instance, he can recall waking up in the middle of the night, his attention being drawn to his floor to ceiling wardrobe. There at the top was a child, and it, because there's no mention of gender ever had been given, was sat cross-legged on the top of this wardrobe. They were looking down intently and unblinkingly at my uncle. He threw the duvet over his head that night and refused to reemerge until morning. Fast forward a few years. My mom's married to my dad. I come along and we move up north. The county that we moved to has an incredibly detailed history from Celt to Roman to Pict to Briton to Viking to Saxon. This particular area we moved to was, and still is, fairly built up and tailored toward tourists. My dad got a job as park warden there. That's for a local caravan/campsite. We moved into a static caravan on site before moving into a gatehouse. Things picked up again from there. Dad went from hearing security alarms going off with no culprit to ever be seen to being shoved hard in the back, nearly sent into the nearby lake while standing on a jetty at the end of his shift. And I hasten to add, in the latter's instance, that there was one around, or rather, no one around but my dad, so he couldn't explain that one off as easily as a faulty alarm system. Back at the gatehouse, my parents both witnessed hands waving at them in the mirror, and knuckle-side facing them. Creatures crawling up the curtains at night which could never be located in the daytime. And as a baby, I was put on a mild sedative as I was terrified at night, screaming when taken to bed. It later transpired I'd been terrified of a man at the top of the stairs. Figures would be seen walking through the hallway and out through the front door. Through the front door. The worst thing for my mom was having a nightmare one night. She was dressed in Victorian petticoats, racing down the road from where we lived. She was being chased, but she knew if she looked back, her pursuer would catch her. She raced straight into the center of the town, cutting through the local St. Mary's churchyard. At some point, she ended up falling into an open space in the ground, and her pursuer, which was an invisible force, landed on top of her, banging her head into the ground, but also forcing her to look up and read the epitaph. My mom was too terrified to really comprehend what she was reading. And what wasn't helping was the fact that she was also wide awake in bed, her head being pushed deep into the pillow. She was screaming for my dad, and her fear had made her voice turn into a strangled whisper. So he didn't wind up hearing a thing, and then it just stopped. As soon as it all started, it stopped. 2 weeks after that nightmare, it transpired that there'd been an exorcism at a nearby hotel. That's where guests had complained of similar events happening to them. The same night my mom had that nightmare. Fast forward a few more years. I'm not going to make this sound this time. I was in my teens. My sister had now joined us. We're moving back to the same childhood town of my folks. My sister was now going through a phase of witnessing a man appearing at night, emerging up through the floorboards at the foot of her bed, walking out onto the landing before turning left and merging through the wall of the neighbor's house. As we lived in a renovated pub, which had been split in two after providing a description of this character to some of the locals, it transpired the guy was the old landlord of the pub, who'd apparently passed away a year before we moved in. This apparition stopped when Dad put some hardboard up to create a makeshift hallway for, a loft conversion. A couple more years later, we'd done a house swap with my mom's dad, and we're back in her childhood home, full circle. My sister backseated my mom's childhood bedroom as it was the bigger room, and she got to have a fireplace. I was fine with the newly refurbed attic space. Mom was in her parents' old room, and Dad, owing to his snoring, was allocated the spare bedroom, my uncle's old room. Well, you can imagine, can't you? My sister soon started hearing things, footsteps walking about, but no one being there. She'd see things in the dark, and it would sort of creep her out enough to hurry into my mom's room and share her bed. Mom picked her up her old habit of yelling "get out" in her sleep in that same demonic voice, which frightened my sister even more, but it wasn't either scaring Mom or disembodied figures. She put her faith in staying in bed with the former than going alone with the latter. All of us girls in the family refused to head up the stairs in the darkness. Lights had to go on every time. Even if we were halfway up the stairs, we'd have to run back down and switch the lights on and then head back up again. One night, my sister heard the living room door slam shut. Heavy steps coming upstairs, slowly approaching Mom's room, that she was once again staying in. Before hurriedly walking away when my sister tried to get a better look at the owner of the sounds. In the morning, the living room door was wide open. That's when we both got up, and was left wide open when they went to work or school in my sister's case. It was closing fast when I got downstairs a few hours later. We've all moved out of that house now. My sister and I have our own places. Still experiencing the odd one or two events, and my sister not so much. I guess I've just managed to convince myself that the girls in our family are a magnet for paranormal-like activity. Surreal moment this morning. Needs some debunking. You've all heard of the game Knock, Door, Run. I hope. It's where kids dare each other to sneak up to someone's front door and either knock it, ring the doorbell, or clatter the letterbox. Then just run for their lives to avoid getting caught. Well, the skeptic in me thinks this has just happened. However, the believer in me is cautioning me not to be so hasty. My granddad was rushed to A&E last night with a suspected heart attack. After 4.5 hours of not being seen. That's because the UK NHS is in shambles right now. He discharged himself, and my mom just brought him home. Throughout last night, I kept hearing the items clattering around in my bedroom, and I saw a tall shadow figure slip in and out of the walls. That was on several occasions. The temperature plummeted too. I couldn't get warm. I put it down to my feeling stressed about his welfare, and I am very close with my granddad. While I do live over 100 miles away from him in the Northeast, my husband and I relocated in summer last year. I'd hoped my granddad would be able to visit at some point this year, meeting her new dog and see the sights of her new hometown. He's been asking me to describe the local area to him in as much detail as possible. This morning I came downstairs, fed the dog, picked up her muck in the backyard, took the bin in to prep for, collection tomorrow. Nothing out of the ordinary. I sat down and I called my folks to see if there are any updates. Yeah, he's up and about this morning, but after a shower he'd slumped into his chair. He was exhausted with barely any breath. The docs have called up many folks to say his one lung appeared softer than the other. They need to talk to him about his heart, so the sooner he can get in, the better. Mom ended the call with that and an assurance that I'd be kept updated throughout the day. I sat back, played a game of tug-of-war with the dog, then switched on the TV. The doorbell goes. Now, where our living room is, we would hear anyone creeping or walking or running up to the door. With a big front window right next to it that picks up every little sound. It's double glazing, but the walls are pretty thin. Even if the culprit had scampered, I'd still hear the footsteps stomping away or even the front gate creak on its hinge. Or the squeals and laughter from the kids. Keeping in mind that schools are off, but it's about 9:30 at this point. A bit early for knock, door, run. And by the time I got to the door, not even a minute later, there was no one there. There was no parcel on the ground. The postie has just been about maybe 10 a.m. No kids were hiding behind the front hedge of mine or my neighbor's front area. There were no people on the path either up the left or right side of the pavement out in the front. Even if the kids had gone away, I'd still be able to see them running or trying to make a bid to hide. So, am I being paranoid? Do you think this is a case of knock, door, run? Or do you suppose something else is happening? I hasten to add that while my granddad was younger, or rather when he was younger, he practiced deep meditation and claims to have an out-of-body experience. He once told me that if he felt things were going south for him again, he'd happily put himself into a trance and just not return. As far as I'm aware, he's still alive, but very unwell. Am I just experiencing